Yes, so well, nice to chat to you. And after all this time, and of course we spoke last week, and lots changed in the last 20 years, hasn't it?
Or one or two things really, hasn't it? So some things are the same and there's a lot that's changed.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, no, I just kind of like I said to you last week, it was just you and I kind of got very much in the same kind of movement and network, and I just would be good to kind of talk a little bit about the general concepts of sovereignty and freedom and all that, because this month is all devoted to that. And your first
Excellent.
cab off the rank, mate, so all the pressure's on you.
Excellent. That's exactly how I like it. I excel well in pressure situations.
Yeah, I'm the same. I actually was saying that today. I said that when I kind of start to get very much, I don't really want to get caught up in standing for what's right and all that. I notice that my
Yeah.
energy goes back. And whereas when
Yeah.
I speak out and the challenges are there, I enjoy life a lot more.
Oh, it is. Well, it's a bizarre sort of thing, a bizarre enjoyment of it because I can't help myself. I just get stuck straight into it. Even if I don't know what I'm doing, I'll get in there and I'll soon learn along the way.
You like you said in COVID, speaking out well and truly. I think you and I both did it, and it was a bit of a ruckus.
Well, you can always tell when there are idiots up there sort of spouting stuff that's just not true. They've got no clue. And it's like, you can see it transparently.
Yes. Well, what I might do is just so people, can meet you and know a bit more about you. I mean, I'll just quickly introduce you on my limited understanding of you, and then get you to share more about you and who you are. So, is that okay?
Mate, you probably know more about me than I do about myself.
Probably do, mate. Maybe I'm God. No, not really.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I'm a former lawyer, accountant, and all that kind of annoying stuff. But yeah, whereas you've been smart enough to keep away from all that. But Nick is the best way to understand Nick is I first came across him because years ago, and I've told all of you that's listening how I've been involved very much in sovereignty for many years. I discovered a whole lot of things 20, 25 odd years ago, and I ended up getting involved in underground, off the grid kind of movements of people and who we're very much a believer in the lawful rights as taught by Bastiat, which I've mentioned, about the difference between lawful and illegal, and not about fighting the system, but about, hang on a sec, for us to submit to you, we do want to see proof and lawful authority. And if you can show that, great. And if you can't show that, well, then, why would we submit to that? In other words, show us what's lawful. And that's one of the things I remember reading. Nick was one of the first guys who basically got some, traction in New Zealand on that area and actually won a case, a bit like I had a similar thing happen to me in Queensland, but I won't go into that right now, when I won a case on a similar kind of situation, but basically arguing the lawful authority, and ended up basically, finding sovereignty in different ways in terms of business and all that, but certainly knows the importance of knowing who you are and knowing about sovereignty and about the fact that we, Nick Cree and Warren Black, we are, sovereign men and women to God, which I've taught a lot in many of our webinars. And then governments basically are under the people to the point where they're called public servants, which means we're their masters. So basically, that's their job. And so Nick's basically had some pretty good traction in that area. And whatever you're comfortable to speak and share about your story, Nick, that's why I'm not saying too much about it. I'll let you share what you're comfortable sharing about your journey and introducing yourself to everyone.
Well, where do you start? I've always been one of these people that I think the most common thing I ever heard as a child was don't answer back, and why do you always have to have the last word? And my response to that is I don't have the last word, which of course was the last word. and, and I got into trouble with employers. I remember working at Nightfall at Woolworths back in New Zealand, and there's some idiotic things that happen in these workplaces, and I'm just not one to keep my mouth shut. It's like, if I see something that just doesn't work, it's like I've got this compulsion just to say something. And so I do. So I often would, and my boss there would say, why do you have to question what we do? And, why do you have to have the last word? And but of course, when they ask a question, you've got to respond. So I responded back, and so he just couldn't handle that. So yeah, I wasn't at that job for very long, but I think that sort of set me up pretty well for I think just asking questions. I just ask a lot of questions. And I remember going to a conference over in, where was that? Fiji. And that was back in, I'd only just started my business. So I'd come out of employment. I'd decided to go into business. And so I was new to the whole thing. And in fact, I was pretty new to taxation as a business person. I knew what it was as an employee and never questioned it. It just used to come out of my wages and salary, and so all I was left with was what was left over. And as far as I was concerned, that was what I earned. But I went to a conference over in Fiji, and what was it called? Investors International. It was called, and yeah, that was a pretty interesting time, and that really expanded my whole concepts about authority, rules, money, wealth, sovereignty. But it all made sense, or a lot of it made sense. Some of it didn't, but yeah, it sort of made sense. So when I came back to New Zealand, there was just a really simple thing. I was still getting to understand this tax stuff from a business perspective, and so I just started writing some letters to the Inland Revenue Department, just asking them some questions, and of course they couldn't answer them, and so I get responses back to say that there was no answer to these questions. And so I got really curious about all that. And so I just used to write back to them. And it would take sometimes, weeks or months to get replies back. But I sort of learnt that, we live in a rules-based society. And there are some rules there that really govern, how we sort of live and whatever in society. But there's some things there that we think are rules, and they're not actually rules. Someone's made it up somewhere along the way, and the only way that it's enforced is by people who know no better, or maybe they do, but often it's people who know no better, who think they know what the rules are, and they go and enforce the rules as umpires. And when someone goes and questions it, it's like this, that there's two responses. They either don't know that what they're doing is not part of the rules at all, it's not a rule at all, or they do know, and they're just, sort of pushing forward anyway. But no one really had a response that was, no, you're right, this is, this is not a rule. And so, no one sort of, particularly in the government and in those in authority, would ever go down that line there, the line there that I was right. In fact, I can tell you some stuff about how they tried to shut me down a number of times too. So that was pretty interesting as well. So, but I was doing this. I was doing this while I was running a business. I was new into business, new into challenging, or just asking some questions, and that was really where I got started with it all.
Oh, mate, yeah, it just gets me excited when we talk about this because, I mean, you would have known about Andrew Carstensen and with the UCC connection and Howard Freeman and all that.
Oh, Andrew was a good friend of mine. So, yeah, I was in Wellington at the time. Andrew's up in Auckland. So we used to talk quite regularly. And,
Andrew was the first guy who told me about the ATO and the tax office actually having no lawful authority. And I'm like, huh? He's one of the guys who showed me it and how he wrote the letters, and it was just brilliant.
Well, the interesting thing about Andrew is he taught me sort of quite a lot of stuff around all that, and I met another guy who was also friends with him, a guy by the name of Eddie Kane, and he was in the States, and really softly spoken guy, and he said, don't push back against authority at all. He said, just ask some questions. And but the questions you ask them, the ones that they are uncomfortable with, or the ones they can't answer. And so I thought, oh, it's a pretty good strategy. So Andrew and I used to talk about this there. But I'm just one of these people that, if you give me that there, I'm just going to go and do it. So I just went in and did it. And so I went down quite deep into that rabbit hole, and came up with a considerable amount of resistance, you could call it.
Oh, as you would. Yeah.
I was the one that ended up in the court. I spent years and years in court. Probably, probably a good 10 years. I was in and out of court with this. So, which was fascinating. And I'm not a lawyer. So I was just doing it all myself.
Yeah, I remember reading your transcript. The only guy I ever read, you could see the judge was bewildered and going, well, you can't say to the government, you can't prove what you're saying, but this is him, this because it's a capital person, you can basically case dismissed. And yeah, I
Yeah.
know a similar thing happened to me in Queensland. So yeah.
Well, it was funny too because like I appeared in the the main district court in New Zealand, and that was where everything's heard. That was the big main court. And I remember turning up there one time, and I was standing where the lawyers stand. So I didn't. No, I was standing. No, I was standing in the public gallery. Standing in the public gallery. So I didn't sort of proceed through to where the lawyers were, and I also didn't go to the dock. And so I presented my whole thing from the public gallery, and it was all to the judge to say, look, I'm here just to make sure there's no mistake. Here's what I'm doing. And I remember a lawyer coming past me, and he whispered into my ear. He was obviously very threatened by all this, and he whispered in my ear. He said, "Just effing plead," and because he just wanted me to sort of say guilty or not guilty. But of course, I wasn't going to do that. I was arguing something else.
Yeah, oh God, it's
But the funny thing was that being in that big courtroom, when we got down to the nuts and bolts, they ended up sort of pushing me down into a very small courtroom underneath the court, and that was really for I think it's a family court, so small family court hearing. So it was really out of the way of the public. So all the public would go into the main courtroom. There's hardly anyone down in the small courtrooms. So that's where the real action happened, was down there, and that was where one of the judges there was he was really bewildered with what I was talking about. Do you want me to talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, this is exciting. God, I just feel like a kid in a candy shop. This is the sort of stuff that I fed my life on, because I was like, you did this for years, so keep going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I only ever asked 2 questions of the Inland Revenue Department, only 2. And they're quite simple questions. There's nothing hard or difficult about them. And it was all around what's the definition of income? Because they've got the Income Tax Act and they've got various other tax acts as well. There is no definition of income at all in those acts. So when I'm asking for the definition of income, and I did it under a Freedom of Information request, all proper process, following the rules, and so they came back, and they would give me things like, here's the passage in the legislation that deals with income, and of course there was no definition of income at all. And then the second one was, what's the definition of person? Now, you'd think that that's a fairly common sense thing. It's like a person is a living flesh, human being or whatever. But no, that's not the case. In the New Zealand legislation, a person is defined as a corporation sole. So it's not even defined as a natural flesh and blood living person. So of course, I've got these things here that there's no definition of income. Me as a flesh and blood person, I don't fit the definition of person as in the legislation. We live in a rules-based society, so I'm just following the rules. They've set the rules, not me. And they're trying to enforce these rules on me, and I'm just asking questions. So I went down to that little courtroom down below, and the Inland Revenue lawyer was down there. Well, first of all, he was represented by someone. So there was him, and then they actually had their legal counsel. And I was in there just before this case was going to be heard. And the legal counsel was she was prosecuting an immigrant to New Zealand who didn't speak much English for taking too many clamshells off the Eastbourne foreshore. And so he had trouble sort of understanding, and the judge said, "This is ridiculous," and threw it out. And of course, she was absolutely gutted by that. And I looked over to the guy that had won it, and I just did a bit of a fist pump to him and said, "Yes." And she saw this, so she glared at me, and she was just gunning me. So by the time it came around for her to sort of get stuck into me, she just went to town. And the judge actually stopped and said, "Okay, well, let's just move on and find out what Mr. Cree has to say." And I turned to the judge and I said, "Well, look, I'm in a bit of a dilemma here." I said, "I've been trying to file these tax returns, these income tax returns," and I said, "Now, to my understanding, if you don't file income tax returns, then that's an offence and you can be fined for that." He said, "Yep, that's right. That's in the legislation." And I said, "Well, the other problem I've got is that if you file them incorrectly, then you could also be up for a fine as well." So I said, and he said, "Yeah, well, that's right." And I said, "Would it be fair and reasonable that I should find out exactly what I need to file so that I can file these tax returns correctly?" And he said, "Yeah, that's fair and reasonable." I said, "Well, that's all I've been trying to do." I said, "I'm in a bit of a rock and a hard place." I said, "Look, I've been willing to file these tax returns. At no point have I said that I wasn't going to do it. All I want to do is to get some clarity on two things." And he said, "What are they?" I said, "One is definition of income." I've got money from all sorts from various different sources. I've just been asking, what's the definition of income? And so he turned around to the Inland Revenue lawyer and said, "Well, that seems like a fairly simple request. Why haven't you answered that? Or why have you not responded to it?" And he said, "Oh, well, we can't." He said, there isn't the definition that he's looking for in the Tax Act." And the judge just sat there and looked for a while, and he said, "Oh, what was the other thing?" I said, "Oh, well, the other one is whether I need to pay income tax as a natural flesh and blood person." And I said, "So I've been asking for, the definition of person to see whether I need to pay." So he turned around to the Inland Revenue again, representative again, and said, and asked him that question. And he said, "Well," he said, "we've given them the definition of person." And he said, "Well, what is it? Where is it in the Tax Act?" So he rattled off where it was in the Tax Act. And I said, "Oh, I don't see anywhere in there where it talks about me as as a normal living person, that I'm covered by that definition." And the judge was sort of reading through it and had a look at it. And in the end, he says, "I can understand your dilemma." He said, "I don't know what to do about this." And he said, "Oh, I'm going to have to go into recess and sort of think about what we do with this." He said, I can't make a ruling on this today." And so that was where we left it in that at that instant there. So and for me, that was a pivotal point, because I thought, right, I'm onto something, and I know that this is right.
Yes, and it kind of had its own little journey after that, didn't it? They kind of, in the end, didn't know what to do with you and kind of backed off a bit. Is that right?
That was it. And look, all I was doing was asking questions. I was not taking a position at all. I just asked questions, and I was asking questions they could answer it, but they couldn't answer it the way that they wanted to answer it.
Yeah, it's kind of reminds you, because Eddie Kahn said that. One of my favorites, as well as how he showed me, he spent 3 days in the library in Australia and discovered that the ATO wasn't a lawful entity at all, which of course I saw the affidavit, and that there was no legal obligation, the Tax Act, to actually pay income tax. But the thing he remembered telling me, which helped me with another matter, he said the law bar tried to get him for giving legal advice as a non-lawyer. And he said, "Well, I need you to prove your jurisdiction over me," because he said, "I've never consented to anything with you at any point in time." And apparently they argued point and nail of him. He goes, "Well, until you show me that you're just a corporate private body and I don't have any dealings with you." And then they kind of yelled a bit and then backed off him. And I remember months later having a similar run-in when I was doing some, that was as many years ago, finance broking stuff. And I didn't realize at the time that apparently you were supposed to be licensed, because back then mortgage broking wasn't licensed. But the state I live in, WA, the land of the emperors, we kind of there's a one place where they had certain finance broking which technically covered it. And I remember saying to them, "Well, why would I submit under this system when you're telling me I have to do this and put a trust account? This is silly." And that's what I told a guy on the phone, and I just hung up on him. And Ended up using it in a few situations of that. And basically, yeah, so, and in fact, I ended up basically in the Queensland court because I did the same thing with the magistrate. I just asked him very courteously, following what Eddie Kahn said and Howard Freeman, that you want to be sheep among wolves, as Jesus says in the Bible. Because Jesus said, you know, be a sheep among a wolf. And I just said to him, look, I just want to understand why I'm being prosecuted by Sergeant Nigel Bowman. Are you saying he owns the roads in Queensland? And the magistrate's face had this big grin. He goes, okay, so what are you saying? I said, well, you can see these 5 cops staring at me in absolute astonishment, and they're kind of going like that at each other. And I'm saying, well, I said, I don't mind if, you know, but my understanding is that whoever owns the roads is the one who can fine me for driving on a commercial road. So I said, for me to be fined on driving on a commercial road, then surely it's the owner of the roads. Now, that would either mean the state of Queensland owns the roads now and have taken control of them, which is fine if that's happened, or whatever. But Nigel Bowman, I mean, I've never done anything to that guy. I mean, I don't have any beef with him. I don't think he's got any beef with me. And the magistrate, you could see, was trying not to laugh and turned to the cop and said, well, he's got a fair point. He's just trying to get the authority. Can you provide Mr. Black with the authority? And for 4 hours, they were arguing with him and trying to get around it, ringing the commissioner of police in my presence frantically. And finally, they found another technicality and hastily dismissed the case. And I remember the head prosecutor coming up afterwards, just shaking his head going, mate, you just whipped my butt. I don't know what happened.
But doesn't it go to show that, you know, no one actually knows what the rules are?
No, that's what's Babylon. Babylon means confusion. Like, that's the
Yeah.
whole point, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, I know that when I had the bailiffs come and try and seize my car at one point, and my car was locked in the garage, so there was no way I was pulling the car out for them. And I said to him, I said, do you know what this is all about? And he says, yes, I'm really fascinated by this. He said, this is really interesting. He said, unfortunately, I've got a job to do, but he said, I just love it when you come into court. And he's in the public gallery there. He says, you know, we just go in because what you're saying is it's just fascinating. So he knew that something was up. And so, and he was you know, he was just paid to, you know, to go and, you know, deliver enforcement orders and take action with these enforcement actions. Anyway, he left without my car, and I said, look, come around sometime, and look, happy to sit down and have a chat with you, have a beer, and we'll have a chat. He says, mate, I would love to do that, but he said I couldn't do it because I'd lose my job.
Oh, man, it reminds you of what Eddie Kahn and Andrew said, you know, and I've applied that. Like, government officials, most of them are just doing their job. They're just normal people on a salary, as pissed off. You know, and years ago when I had a full audit from the tax office, I remember at the end of it, I was just very friendly with the auditor. I just said to him, look, I'm very happy to help. I understand you guys like the arbiter of the whole thing. Here's all the documents, you know, and I've been through plenty of regulatory audits and investigations. I've had the legal practice board, everyone up my butthole. But I just said to him, look, you know, I'm happy to basically give you whatever you want. I'll answer your questions. You know, and as long as you're not here to pick a fight with me, I'm here to answer the questions and let you know what's going on. And they asked me questions, and at the end of the audit, they said, well, that's fine. And then I ended up having a long chat with them and sitting there like outside the office and talking about career advice and everything. And, you know, about how the whole tax system was wrong. And I remember the same thing happened when the ATO aggressive tax planning, offshore planning turned up at my office to spend a couple of hours with me. And by the end of it, they go, okay, yeah, no, we're fine with what you're doing. And they said, we don't disagree with you, by the way. We think the system is ridiculous and the taxes are way too high, but it's not so we just said off the record, we actually don't disagree with you on that one. It's just that it's not our job to kind of discuss that with you. It's our job to...
They've got a job to do.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that I got into this sort of person. I don't know what he was with. He's part of that legal team at the Inland Revenue Department. You know, we used to talk on a fairly regular basis because I don't think anyone else was allowed to talk to me. So he was the one that was that could talk to me. And so we got to know each other, yeah, reasonably well. And I remember he rang me up one day and there is there's a number of there was someone in New Zealand who was putting together trusts and foundations for sovereign individuals. And the Inland Revenue Department were trying to get into them and unravel them. And they couldn't, because they were, there's nothing wrong with them. They were legal, they were within the law. And so he rang me to ask me, so what these trusts were, and sort of how they worked, and how they were put together, and was it a tax evasion sort of thing? And I said, "Oh, I don't really know what you're talking about. Yeah, can you tell me what it is?" So he went through and explained all these the trusts. And I said, "Oh, is that illegal? Is it?" And he said, "Well, no, it's not. But there's a number of them that have been set up, and these people aren't paying tax, and we're just trying to find a way to ensure that they are sort of paying tax." And I said, "Is it wrong not to pay tax under these structures?" And we said, "No, it's not." And I didn't give him any information. He told me everything in terms of what the Inland Revenue Department were doing. So I went back to the guy that was setting it all up, and sort of gave him the information that on the conversation that we'd had. But he didn't know. He just didn't know. He was there on a fishing expedition.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's
But he just had a job to do.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was, when I was talking about that case, which was down in that little courtroom, I don't know whether you know Ian Wishart. He's a journalist in New Zealand. Come across him? Yeah. So he was had a magazine called Investigate, and he was open up issues that were that were sort of hidden. So like there was one called the Wine Box Inquiry. So that was one, and that was a big case in New Zealand. It's almost like New Zealand's Watergate inquiry. So he was responsible for publishing some of the information that was there, and he sort of published things like when nuclear submarines came into New Zealand, when New Zealand was a nuclear-free nation. And so he got documents that the government officials and the US government, they had agreements to have these submarines come in under the cloak of dark. So he found all this sort of stuff and then would publish it. So highly embarrassing for the government and the authorities. But anyway, he had dinner with some of the senior judges in the courts in New Zealand up in Auckland. So I was down in Wellington, he was up in Auckland. And he knew them sort of, reasonably well because he was a journalist. And then he just happened to ask, that case down in Wellington with that Nicholas Cree, what are your thoughts about that there? And he said the whole room just went silent, and one of the judges just said, "We have to shut this down." He said, "We cannot allow this to continue. We have to shut it down." And so the next time I appeared in court, then that was like, it's probably about a year or so later. It was back up in the main court, and the judge that was there said, I'm just going to have to close this off." He said, "You've made the wrong, I think you've made some wrong choices. I'm just going to close it off." And I said, "I'm here because I thought this was where we were going to argue the case and sort of continue it." He said, "No, we're not going to allow you to do that. We're just going to shut it down." And that's what they did at that point there.
Yeah, do you know, I had the same thing happen to me. I won so many speeding fine matters and various others and all kinds of stuff. And I remember having a knock on my door, and look, they were perfectly pleasant. I actually had a cop turn up at my door and had a drink with me, and lovely guy, looked a bit sheepish, and he pretty much said to me, and I just sat there with my mouth dropping. He goes, "Look," he goes, "we don't really like what you're doing." He said, "This is from my boss, because, we've got a system to maintain. We want to make sure monies keep getting paid and fines and that people are driving rightly on the roads. And, so basically we're going to shut you down and stop you doing what you're doing." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" he said, yeah, you'll find out in court. He said, we'll just basically, yeah, we're not going to let that happen anymore. And he was a lovely guy. And I said to him, well, thank you. But he goes, yeah, look, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I've just got to come and tell you this. And I was so astonished. I thought, that can't possibly be right. And I think I went to court, not just in WA, but in Queensland. And the magistrates, the same magistrates who'd been favourable to me, go, oh, Mr. Black, before you say anything, we've read your submissions. They have no merit. We're dismissing the case. And that was it. Shut me absolutely down.
Yeah.
And I just sat there. And then, of course, on the legal practice board, like a massive carrot up my ass, on literally like a bit like Trump, you know, trying to prosecute for jaywalking on a very minor thing. And after about 3 years of fighting and going pretty hard, I remember thinking, no, I just need to stop this for a while and reset and all that. But yeah, and I remember I learned firsthand how the whole system's run by basically a bunch of cartel masons and various others who, you know, a lot of the people in there are quite decent, but you got a few very naughty masons and systems that kind of fuck around with this kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were the ones that just wanted to shut everything down. So, and I know that when I was going through all this, I spent 10 years, you know, in and out of court and working this. I don't know how I ran a business during that time, but I managed to run a business, and a reasonably good business at that time. I was mortgage broking too, so in the finance game, and but this just consumed so much time. But it was fascinating at the same time as well. I couldn't let it go.
I'm the same. It's kind of something that you look back and then you think, I'm glad I did it, because I spoke out, and even COVID, I mean, COVID took a lot out of me, but I remember afterwards someone said, how do you feel about the fact? I said, you know what? I said, I feel like an NBA player who just lost the championship. I said, you feel like shit, but you can walk out knowing that you left your blood on the court and that you did your best. And I said, because, you know, I chose not to get the back to do that stupid experiment, and not to wear those muzzles, and not just that, but to speak out against it. And that certainly, I paid a price for it, mind you. I've certainly had a bit of attention since COVID because I did that. And I kind of went in there knowing the risk. But yeah, it's not something I regret, because I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life is speaking the truth and standing for what's right. You kind of want to, in a way, have a bit of an illusion about it, like, oh, everything will go well. But sometimes you do pay a price. And I'm sure Trump, and I always look at Trump and I laugh with him, because that's someone who just kind of goes, fuck you, man. I mean, you're not going to prosecute me for this bullshit. And, you know, and the fact is, I know. I mean, the more I studied the system, I was like, gosh, none of the rich 100 pay hardly any taxes. You know, they just don't.
Yeah.
I mean, mind you, they have a legal bill of $2 million a year to deal with all the regulatory investigations and the shit they get from the government, but they know the game and they're willing to fight for what they believe in, you know? And I think that's something that we're entering days where if we don't become a people who fight for what we believe in, or at least stand in our truth, we just got to keep getting butt fucked, you know, worse than COVID.
Well, and the thing that really interests me about that, or is frightening about it as well, is that, like, I was the same as you. Like, I didn't take the jungle juice. It was like, and for me, it just didn't make sense. It's like, who's telling me what to do with my, I don't even know what this stuff is. And, you know, I don't even know what this virus thing is either. I'm willing to take my chances on it. And I'm pretty sure that this thing is not going to wipe out the world population like they said it. So I thought, this is just absurd. So I thought, I'm not an early adopter. I'm someone that will wait and see what happens to other people before I sort of submit myself to that sort of thing. But I'm also not one of these people that can keep my mouth shut either. So it's a fatal flaw of mine. So on social media, of course, I air my views about this whole thing. And to my astonishment, there are people that were defending, you know, these bureaucrats for you know, wanting to make decisions on, you know, what they do with their bodies, what they do with these sort of this pseudo vaccine experimental thing, and we're defending them. I'm thinking, how does this happen? And so I just started questioning them on social media. And I remember one of them. He was a lawyer in Wellington, New Zealand, and he was a friend of mine. And mate, he just used to go to town on me in social media. So I'd sort of just. And again, I would just ask questions, and But anyway, he comes back to me and he says, you know, you're irresponsible. You're the person that's going to be responsible for the decimation of the world population. And so he was just over the top. And I looked at him and thinking, mate, you're a lawyer. It's like you understand, you know, rules and regulations and how people, you know, work. It's like, surely this just doesn't sort of pass the smell test. But he just, to this day, I can't understand how someone like that with a reasonable modicum of intelligence and understanding, you know, how the legal system works could get sort of so far down that rabbit hole as to defend them all. But he did work for the government.
I had an interesting run-in with a law firm where one of the big law firms, I went to see them about a legal matter to do with an estate. And I'd kind of gone ahead and got myself not an exemption, and I got myself a mask exemption for, you know, basically, you know, a childhood illness, which I had, which I still had to be mindful of. And I remember going in there and they basically said, you know, like that they were all muzzled up to the hilt. And then, of course, the two main lawyers come out and go, look, you got to put a mask on. I said, no, well, like I'm exempt. I'll show you my exemption. They said, Lane, look, that doesn't matter. You still got to wear it. And I actually burst out laughing. And I said, now, I said, you're a lawyer and you're trying to tell me that you've got to discriminate against a disabled person and force them to basically wear a mask when a doctor's given you an exemption. Are you saying you're better than the doctors and you're going to discriminate against someone disabled? That breaks every fucking law in this country. And to his credit, he pissed himself laughing and goes, you've got me there, 100%. Just let's quickly scurry into the conference room. And I said, okay. And then the funny thing was I ended up educating them and talking to them. He goes, what's your views on this? I told him and he goes, you know what? I don't actually disagree with you. I think this whole thing's way out of control. He said, you know, but as a law firm, we've been given instructions and all that. And I said, yeah, but he said, it's way out of control. He goes, I actually think you got a point what you're saying between you and I. And I said, absolutely. I said, hey, I said, if I wanted to go cut my dick off, it'd be my body, my choice. If my child who's 14 wants to go around and claim they're a bison or that they're a, you know, a girl overnight when they're a boy, they can do so and go in a swimming thing. But then if you're saying, you know, but then I'm saying, hang on a sec, I want to at least question what's going on in my body. I'm somehow selfish and I'm not helping the community. They can get fucked, so far as I'm concerned.
Well, I had a friend of mine, I was in a networking group with him. And this was a BNI group. And, you know, in BNI, you've got to go and do, you know, your one-to-ones to get to know the other people in there. So anyway, he was a pharmacist. I rocked up to his pharmacy. This is before the COVID bullshit. And so he's doing all the flu jabs. And he said, while we're in there, he said, oh, we'll give you a flu jab while you're here. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm happy with that. Can I have a look at the back of the packet there? And just I'd just like to know what the side effects are. And he said, oh, you don't need to worry about that too much, but here it is. And so I read the back of the packet and I turned around and said, what does this mean? And he said, oh, that's a really rare, you know, condition. You know, you'd be lucky to get that. I said, oh, I don't want to be lucky to get that at all. And I said, well, what about this one here? and there was things he just couldn't answer them. I said, I don't think I'm comfortable with that. So putting that in my body unless I know what these things are. These side effects look fairly horrific. I mean, look at the length of the words. And in the end, he just laughed. He said, oh, okay, yeah, fair call. He said, you know, that for him, that he said that was a major revenue source because they're selling drugs in the pharmacy, and on prescription, they get such a small margin on it that they have to sell all the other shit that's in the pharmacy in order to make a profit. And so this was just one of their profitable things. So that was the reason why he was getting everyone to take. Not that it was right or wrong. It's just that this is what was going to keep his pharmacy afloat.
Yeah, you can just see these shadow governments. I mean, you got the front puppet government, then you got the shadow governments, and then you've got kind of even, I don't know if you've ever encountered this, the spiritual forces behind these, you know, governments as well, you know. And yep. I remember I met a guy who actually been involved in mystery schools. He told me a true story. He said he owed a fortune to the tax office and they were chasing him ruthlessly. And he'd been taught a bit of a ritual. So he did some energy work. And next minute he said, as clear as a bell, he felt one of the darkest energies he'd ever seen. And cut a long story short, he basically went ahead and discussed with them and pretty much told them, I'm not going to pay it. And I will use my skills I've learned with energy wise to fuck up your whole system and do all kinds of stuff to you. And the next day he got rung out, literally got rung. The guy said, don't ask questions, your bill's been dropped, and hung up on him.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a few things like that. I've seen a few of these sort of things happen in my time. I don't go too much into it and share normally, but yeah, I've seen this kind of stuff happen. And I've realized more and more that we're definitely in a bit of a spiritual war as well as a legal war. And I mean, you could just see this, like, especially during COVID, like some of the stuff that was being done. I mean, I'm sure you would agree, there's a bigger agenda to this whole thing, you know, a bigger globalization agenda.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, so the problem is we really don't know what it is, and we'll never know what it is. Just know that it exists and it's there, and that I got a sense of as to who some of the players are, but the ones that are right in behind it, no idea who they are.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So really, you know, lawful rights and all that kind of stuff. Like, so really in summary, I think knowing lawful rights in these times is really, 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 really important. Like, how important do you think, Nick, it is for people to be able to, you know, be sovereign and speak out and just about anything to what's going on and stand up for what you believe in?
Oh, I think it's essential, because otherwise you just can be railroaded into doing things that you don't want to do, that you're uncomfortable with, and you're never going to live a, well, certainly a free life, you know, as free as it is here. And I don't think it's even just with government and authorities. I think it's with all aspects of life as well. Like I've been sued by some, it was a lawsuit with no grounds at all. And I thought, is she kidding? Is she serious? But anyway, she was serious, and I met with her as well to try and you know, so avoid going to court. Let's just try and sort this thing out. She was having not a bar of it, and she said to me, she said, I am going to make sure that you are blacklisted. You can never work again, and that I'm going to destroy you. And so she was just exuding this venom and vitriol. And I said, that's fine. If that's what you want to do, you know, I can't stop you there. And anyway, we ended up in, or it did go to court. The good thing about it for me is that I've pulled out all the legislation. So this is me getting back into what I was doing in the tax, you know, with the tax issue that I was dealing with back in New Zealand. So I just, and it's great now because you can just download it all off the internet. Back then, you had to go to the library to get the legal text, but these days you just get it straight off the internet. And so I got all forms and documents, and so I had a good time with it. And my case, I'd prepared it all. Anyway, walk into court, and she's sitting there as well, and she's just got this venom and vitriol in her eyes. And so I thought, I'm not going to say much. So we were, and I was representing myself, and turns out she's representing herself as well too. And so she gives the submission to the judge, to the judge, or he's reading it. He's already got it. He's reading it, and he says, "How much do you think this Mr. Cree? How much does he owe you?" And so she sort of said, "Oh, it's $100 and something odd thousand," and turned to me and said, "How much do you think you owe her?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Oh, there's quite a difference in the distance between those two figures." And so then he went through. He said, "This is the worst. This is the worst documentation that I've seen. This isn't even a proper case." And in the end, he just dismissed it. He said, "I'm just going to refuse this." But what it taught me was, mine was, we didn't even get to mine. But what it taught me is that you need to ask the questions. You don't need to get into the fight. You just have to ask the questions, and you need to prepare, and you need to know what the rules in the law are. And it was more important to know the rules of court, than it was to know the law. So knowing the rules of court, I think, was the one thing where she fell down, and where it saved me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just knowing who you are, like, you got to walk in and know the law and know the basics of the law and how it all works. And I always go back to what Eddie Kahn and what these guys say, you know, about knowing lawful versus legal and getting to the heart of the matter.
Yeah, Yeah, yeah. And I think it's just not being afraid to just to speak up. Uh, I've got no problem with that because my mouth just opens. Um, but you know, if it's you just don't accept, uh, I think yeah, it's more you just don't accept what's given to you. You question everything, and that's always been my premise. You question everything, then you know if it's not right, it unravels pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would be, if you gave a few simple tips to people, because I mean, definitely, I think if we ever you and I felt like doing a bit of a lawful rights course, 'cause I think people just get taken advantage of all the time. And I think in these days, if people don't know how to stand in their power and their sovereignty, whether it's finances, health, someone else will take power over you, whether it's in health, many are in abusive relationships, many are
Yep.
financially being butt fucked, so to speak. What would be your like if you had to give three tips to people to basically be sovereign, what would they be?
First thing would be believe nothing. Everything needs to be questioned. The
Yeah.
second thing would be to educate yourself, and the education is uh, not what they give you; it's what you go and discover and what you go and find out. And the third thing would be to actually be prepared to stand your ground and not just accept you know what people want to give you.
I like that. Yeah, you question everything. Like I do that. Like I'm dealing with a regulator issue at the moment, which is pretty common. I've got a couple of legal matters pending. And I think what I kind of went through a bit of a whinge about it until I just thought, well, at the end of the day, the rich 200 have pretty much got lawyers on a 2-3 million retainer a year, just purely to handle the shit they're getting from governments and the task forces. And
Yeah,
I can either go and live in the mountains and hide, or I can speak out and stand for what I believe in. And yeah, you're right. You question everything because most of the time they just spin shit on you, you know. And
yeah, and they don't know.
they don't know. And I remember when I worked for the tax office years ago, Nick. I remember I'd see this regularly. You know, companies who didn't pay a lot of taxes, like large companies, and they would be, you know, they would lawyer up, and the tax office would be going into fight for them for 800 million. And I was back then a bit more younger and naive, and I remember my boss walking in very annoyed, very upset, and I'm like, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Oh, they said we just settled for $2 million on that $800 million tax bill. They kind of realized it was going to be too hard to fight." And I think ASIC lose most of their cases, you know, once someone gets serious and gets a good lawyer in, you know,
Mm,
just simply knowing how to step up and push back. And I've learned that. I mean, most times if someone after me legally, I get nervous. I then read what's going on. About 9 out of 10 times, it's just crap, you know. And occasionally there is a real issue, and then you go, okay, there's a real issue here. I'm going to have to find a way to deal with this, you know.
and I think there's no harm in playing dumb. That's been a real asset for me too. So I've got no idea what's going on. So
Play dumb.
enlighten me.
Yeah, you don't want to walk around with the ego saying I'm the big wig. You know, it's kind of like I've learned that the more you know, the better off you like to keep things simple and shut your mouth. Like during COVID, most of the time I didn't make a really big deal. But if someone gave me shit, I told him my strategy. I would just fight them with humor and trolling, and it worked very effectively.
Well, I had people that I knew that were ended up getting arrested, you know, for taking a stand during COVID, and they were quite vocal about it as well. And even though I was reasonably vocal on social media, it was more provocative than asking questions. I didn't deliberately, you know, sort of go and take a public stand. And I think, you know, there are fights that you pick and there are fights that you don't. And there's the places where you want to pick your fights
Yeah.
or places you want to defend. And you want to make sure that where you are is a place that you can defend, not picking a fight where you're
Yes.
you know, you might be right, but you're always going to lose.
Well, I live my life by the Neo and Morpheus strategy, where basically, as I said, you know, not everyone wants to get out of the matrix, and most people actually don't. But what they were about was those who want to get out, and the whole end of the first movie was the ones who want to leave can leave. And it's kind of like that's always been my thing. And years ago, I was reminded today actually by a friend of mine. He said one of his favorite moments was in TV was he said, "Do you remember the Panama Papers when you were named in that big offshore tax business with all the celebrities?" And I was named in the Panama Papers. And I don't know, if you saw it, I was on the ABC, and they actually, and I was asked by the reporter, they said, you know, don't you feel it's a bit selfish of you and a bit bad? Because they said what you're doing is you're helping people, you know, legally minimize taxes, you know, or minimize, get out of paying taxes and not paying their fair share of the community. And I just said, well, I said, from what I can see, Google, Facebook, PayPal, and all of the rich 200 pay less than 1%. So I said, unless I'm missing something, I said, well, small businesses pay an average of 30%. I said, I make no apologies for helping people legally minimize and pay as little as they fucking have to. You know, and if the government want to change the system so everyone pays the same amount fairly, absolutely, different story. I'll probably stop doing what I'm doing. Until then, I make no apologies for what I'm doing. And the ABC said, we can't argue with you on that one. I'm like, yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah, yeah. And they don't know either. They're only asking questions.
Yeah. No, it's good. So really, in finishing off today, I mean, before I take questions, if anyone's got any questions, I mean, would you be open to doing, like I said, I mean, we talked about, if it goes well, doing another one? Because I know you maybe share about your business, because it would be good to teach. We're going to be teaching on sovereignty all month, and we're going to teach on, very important to me is having your internal sovereignty, where you know to stand for what you believe in. Now, once you've got that right, you can protect your wealth better than any structures. You can create income more, you know, that trait of being strong and being clear in who you are and not afraid to stand for what you believe in will then carry through in your business in that, you know, alpha sense. But obviously there's practical matters about income, you know. Would you be open to doing another podcast to share with me about income sovereignty as well? I mean, when I say income, not that the ATO knows what it is, but on financial and, you know, money sovereignty.
So money, so whatever this thing money is called, or
Yeah, whatever.
I don't know what income is, because I couldn't get a definition of that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is either. I think just wealth or abundance, because at the end of the day, it's just a fiat bullshit system anyway. So
yeah. But no, I'd be more than happy to talk about that and have a discussion about that. And I know that, you know, during my time there, my relationship with the Inland Revenue Department, I was running a business, so I had to make you know, money through that, and I had a reasonably good lifestyle through all that as well too. And when I came over to Australia, I deliberately set up so that I was not beholden to anyone, and that I was able to generate wealth over here, and have spent the time, you know, helping other people to do the same thing as well. So, yeah, it's one of those topics that I really enjoy.
no,
And it's about lifestyle as well. It's not about the money, it's about the lifestyle, how you want to live.
yeah, well, that's the biggest thing, you know, and it's kind of like, it's one of the reasons I love about Trump. You know, Trump's got no fear. And a lot of people who don't like Trump, you can see they don't like the fact that you got a guy who owns his dark side, owns the fact that he's an absolute dick, and just stands in his truth, and he's not afraid to push and bring out into the light what's been hidden. And
He pushes back.
Pushes back.
Yep. I don't know how he does it. I think, you know, I've had my fair share of stuff pushed at me, and he's a politician, and that's one of the reasons why I thought I'm never going into politics, because they dredge up all this shit on you, and then you've got to fight off. But for him, it's just like
he loves it.
Walk the ducks back. It's like, what's wrong with it? It's like, this happened. This is how it was, and he just fights back.
Oh, he loves it. You can see he thrives on it. They played into his hands because he was kind of losing his shine as a political leader, and he got it back because they went after him for jaywalking and everything else. And
yes,
you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a friend here who's a very strong common law, lawful rights Christian guy who got into politics, and he was a farmer, owned a lot of companies, very wealthy guy. Within 3 weeks, he told me, he goes, 2 guys turned up at his house dressed in black. And they introduced themselves as the guys who effectively run the government in the background, and said, you know, we expect you to be speaking out in this kind of stuff, because he was quite a vocal guy with the country. And he just said, I told him to get stuffed. He said, there's no way. He goes, my job is to represent my electorate. I have no interest in you guys. You can piss off. And within 3 weeks, he said he got lawsuits hitting. You know, one big company sued his organic farm, and then he had another regulatory investigation, and he literally had like 5 lawsuits or something hitting him. And after 3 years, he thought, can't be bothered, and he stopped doing it. And I remember we talked about this thing. And so learning how to play the game. And in fact, I just saw a message from Grace. She's my she's director of Global Wealth Club. She's co-pastor of sovereignty. She walked this journey for me right from the beginning, you know. we were married at one stage and we've got kids and still best friends and, you know, great friends. And she writes this real sovereignty woman who knows how to stand for what she, you know, a real pusher backer. And she wrote, do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and the benefit of one and all, only then you accept and live up to it. Buddha and the Kalama Sutra. It's a one big game.
Yep, 100%, 100%. Yep.
No, it's good. So before Nick goes, anyone got any questions or comments? Just to let everyone know what we do today was really, Nick and I just agreed that more than anything, we're sort of a chat and a bit of fun. We didn't want to make a big deal, share our story, share a bit about life, get this whole thing about sovereignty underway. If it went well, we do some more, and then we'll start teaching more, because this month is all about empowering people for sovereignty. And the reason is, I'm sure you'll agree, Nick, I just can't help but feeling a COVID phase 2 is on its way, you know, and I think it'll be more than just health this time around. We've got bird flu vax coming up everywhere. I think you're going to be dealing with financial stuff, digital IDs, all kinds of stuff. I think we're heading for a COVID phase 2 that will make phase 1 look like a mere testing phase, you know.
Oh, I think you're right.
We need to empower people. So this month and next month, it's going to be all about empowering people. Yeah, interesting and educational. No questions really coming through, but we're getting a lot of people enjoying it. Who, like Nick, just let us know, raise your hands. Yeah, we're getting plenty of comments here, Nick. I think you're getting more popular than Taylor Swift, mate.
Don't ask me to sing. I can dance, but don't ask me to sing.
Hey, I can dance too. We can dance and sing together.
Yes.
We can be Magic Mikes. Yep. So the only question we've got, Mike says, in the end, they own the guns in court, so how do you win?
Oh, well, that's a really good question.
It's a good question, isn't it?
Really good question. And but you're not going to win in the traditional way by confronting them.
No.
You have to, it's quite a different strategy. Like, as soon as you go head on and confront them, you're going to lose every time. But it really is a strategy of getting them to defeat themselves rather than you defeating them, and that's part of the challenge and part of the skill with it all.
Yeah, I like that. There's a story in the Bible about a guy called Jephthah and Gideon who, you know, took 300 men and went against an enemy that supposedly couldn't be beaten, and he just trusted and was calm and just trusted, it says in God, or trusted that he was on the right path. And as he did it, the enemy turned on itself and the whole thing fell apart. Yeah,
yeah. I've been reading a really good book recently called The 48 Immutable Laws of Power. And that is a fascinating read from the point of view that you get to see the power plays that people, the government, the authorities, you know, are playing on you all the time. And then once you understand what the power play is, then you also understand how to circumvent it.
Yeah, you got me remembering too something that Warwick says is a learning here about asking questions. But you're right. What you said was, you reminded me what Eddie Kahn used to say. He goes, always ask questions. He said, and be at peace with them. He said, be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And Howard Freeman said the same. Just be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I remember Howard Freeman, how he said in 1938, how all the judges were called, and he was told this directly by a Supreme Court judge, was called into a meeting and told, America's now bankrupt, and unfortunately, we're now owned by this basically banking cartel. So by and large, I think it's been happening in the background, but they've got to play the illusion that that the people have got rights. And you can see this with, you know, the Commonwealth of Australia being a corporate entity now and all kinds of shit.
Yeah, I'm just, I wonder what's going to happen sort of down the pipe. We're not too far away. I remember my son saying to me, because we had some discussions in our household about you know, COVID and the vaccine, and you know, whether you should take it or not. And so I would just ask these questions. And I remember him saying you should be more concerned about the digital ID that's coming along than this COVID vaccine and this COVID stuff. And my response to him was to say the two are related. So you need to look at what's happening with this COVID, that whole COVID situation, what they're doing there. It's related to the digital ID, and you need to sort of look at make those connections. I said to him, you're not going to listen to me, but go and do some research. Here's some places to go and do some research. Come back and tell me what you found.
Gosh, that's a really good comment. I actually agree with him because really I always saw COVID as a test phase just to get people used to being told what to do by government. Digital
Mm,
ID will just get everyone into the same grid. And I was saying this the other day actually to Grace. We are talking about it. I said if you study the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, basically the whole world was owned pretty much to church. You couldn't have a Bible unless you were a priest, and all Bibles were in Latin, and you couldn't learn Latin unless you basically were a priest. So basically there was a double whammy. And then the
mm,
church made the laws and charged people to follow them. And the whole system was the biggest social credit system. You went against it, or kings went against them, they'd be excommunicated. And the Dark Ages ended when the printing press came out and people spoke out and went back to individual sovereignty. That was what Luther was about. And basically, the Geneva Bible, if you've ever read that, which is the reason the King James Bible was issued to try and get rid of that, actually Calvin wrote in that book, he said in his marginal notes, because he was the one who smuggled Bibles in all over America, all over England. He said it's the job of the Christian or the sovereign man or woman to honor the government of their day, but when the government of the day overstep God's law, natural laws, they're duty bound to resist and refuse to and not follow those laws. In other words, like you said, be at peace, but ask questions and say, no, I'm not going to follow these laws, unless you can show me there's a genuine lawful authority to what you're actually doing. And
mm.
the thing is, one of the things I learned years ago was the attempt to bring the Dark Ages back. And I was saying to someone, if you think about it, we're in it now. Because the Dark Ages, if you have a digital ID, everyone's under the same social credit. You'll be heretic, excommunicated, bankrupt, or shut out of the grid, out of the system if you don't sort of comply. Bibles have been virtually removed and sacred texts by watering them down, and basically as well as shaming them and teaching them misogynistic and stuff like that. So they've actually brought in another Dark Ages that's far more clever, far more insidious. So I think we're living in some of the most dangerous days just about in recent history by far. I don't know what you reckon, but I think we're in really dangerous times.
And I think the other insidious part of it too is the AI. The development of AI as well too. And that there, it looks like it's a cloak of helping us to live easier, better, do things quicker, faster. But there's the other side of it as well too, which means that it's far easier to be manipulated and controlled as well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone's looking forward to hearing you again. Just raise your hand if you're looking forward to hear us again, because we'll work out a day next week, which works for Nick and for us, and we'll turn up and share more about income sovereignty. So just, yeah, a lot of people raising their hands. And well, thank you for coming, Nick. I really appreciate your time. It's exciting and great to connect with someone who has walked similar paths to me. It's very rare to meet someone like that, isn't it?
We're the ones that put our necks out.
Yeah,
still got the head though.
Oh yeah, no, you pay a price for it, don't you? But you look back and think, I'm glad I did it. And that's kind of how I feel.
Oh, I am too. Yeah, it's, if nothing else, it really did teach me about my about personal sovereignty, and for me, that there is absolute gold.
Yeah, well, have you ever read? The last thing I'll say before I go, have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita?
Oh, I haven't. No, I haven't.
No, because what happens is Krishna, who's the kind of Christ equivalent in that book. The book's basically, in simple terms, King Arjuna is going into war to fight for what's right. And a lot of his family are involved in the war on the other side. And he kind of says to Krishna, I don't want to do a fight. I'm just, a simple guy. I'm a beautiful man. I just want to go and live a simple life. And I'm going to go and retire to the mountains and just become a monk and really live a simple life and enjoy family. And I'm just going to concede, let them have power. He goes, that way I can serve God. And basically Krishna says to him, you speak sincerely, but you speak from ignorance. He said, basically, you're being a coward. He goes, you're a king. It's your duty to stand for what's right. Wake up and step up. And he said, realize it's all an illusion anyway. He said, do not walk away, because people will always remember you as a coward who never stood in his truth. He said, even if you lose and die in the battlefield, you will die with your head held high, knowing that you'll enter the gates of heaven, doing what's right. And that thing always comes back to me, that I agree with you. I like to be at peace, and this is my approach with any regulators. Look, I'd love to work with you. I'll be cooperative, but if you're going to be nasty and pick a fight with me, game on. Game on.
100%.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you, Nick. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
I mean.
Kick the habit that my mind